This episode of the MLB Guardcast is sponsored by Sadnap Studios. Are you in need of assistance when it comes to digital arts, logo creation, website design, brand building, or designing merch? Then look no further than Sadnap Studios. The team at Sadnap Studios wants to help and make your dreams into reality. Everything is original and organically created, nothing AI. You can follow them and check out some of their incredible work on Instagram at sadnap_studios_art drop. Thanks again to the folks at Sadnap Studios. Go Guards. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is time for a brand new episode number 23 of the MLB Guardcast. I am Mike Vorhies. Joining me, as always, maybe a little under the weather tonight, but I think he's going to fight through it because we've got a big one tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, meteorologist, statistician extraordinaire, Bryan Shaw, a.k.a. Barry White. Sir, how are you this evening?
Thank you, Mike. I am a little under the weather. I've been sick since Monday, but I'm going to tough it out because, like you said, we have a very special guest today, and I didn't want to miss it.
We have the honor and privilege to be joined by Cleveland Guardians broadcaster, our friend Jim Rosenhaus, a.k.a. Rosie. Rosie, welcome in, fresh from Arizona.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We just finished our game broadcast, and great to be on your show. And Bryan, the Bryan Shaw, who we know would absolutely battle through less than 100% to be there and be available. So you're carrying on a fine tradition.
Yeah, I know. He's still going strong. He's with the White Sox again this year. Is that correct?
How about that? He's trying to get Jesse Orosco's career appearance record somehow, some way.
Yeah, I did hear that was something he was going for. So an offensive explosion today from the Guardians. I think it came at a right time because it was a little bit of a tough news day for Cleveland from the pitching standpoint. A lot of updates on some injuries and some bad news for some of our guys.
Yeah, certainly the immediate impact to the major league team. Trevor Steffen's out for the year and probably a little bit of next season. Tommy John surgery for him. You kind of had a hunch the way they were describing how long he was going to be out and who he was going to see for second opinions and things like that. So I don't think it's a surprise, but an unfortunate blow because he's that good bridge to Emmanuel Clase on a lot of nights. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, they've acquired Scott Barlow during the offseason to fill that part of that role, but it will test the depth, no question, of the bullpen. And the other one was, he has never reached the major leagues, and we haven't seen him in a while, but he's someone who there was so much promise for. Daniel Espino, major shoulder surgery, and it's going to miss more time. And even if things go exceedingly well, he'll miss about 3.5 full seasons between being on the mound if the rehab goes well this time. So there is a chance that it could be career ending. Knowing the kid, though, he's going to do everything he can do to get back.
Yeah, I was listening to the broadcast today when you were talking to Mike Chernoff and just talking about that and how hard of a worker he is and how disappointed you guys are for him. Now, some bad news, good news. Gavin Williams also had a little bit of a scare, a little bit of an elbow injury, but seems like he's fine. He's just going to start on the IL because of ramp-up time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, timing of this issue is what will keep him apparently off the opening day roster, which, you know what, if he misses a couple of starts at the beginning, it's not the end of the world, and it's probably good that whatever it was, they were able to shut it down, let it calm down, be able to see that it wasn't anything structural, which is huge. And they'll take their time, let him get built up again properly, and then get him out there when it's appropriate. But You certainly want him at some point in time this season, hopefully in April, because he's a huge part of that rotation.
Well, and if you rush him and he has a setback, better he misses only 2 weeks as opposed to something like 2 months. Now, do you think this opens the door for Carlos Carrasco to make the rotation to start off?
I think that's top of mind for a lot of people that he would be a candidate. I think Xavier Curry is a candidate. There's two other guys in camp. Ben Lively would be a candidate, although we haven't seen him too much lately. He's been one of those guys who's had the virus that's been going around. Tyler Beatty is, I think, someone that they're interested in as well. So there's candidates, but I think anybody watching this or listening to this who's a fan of Cleveland baseball and has been for a while is pulling for it to be Carlos Carrasco, no question. And he's looked good in the camp. He really
Yeah.
has.
And one of the other additions that they made in this offseason, bringing back Austin Hedges. So good luck to you with Hedges and Hedges again, and Bybee and Beatty and Bieber, and
It's a mess.
keeping all of that straight and not slipping up.
If Beatty makes the rotation and it ends up being Bieber, Bybee, Beatty, that's uncalled for.
Good luck. Well, Rosie, I'm gonna come out and ask it. You don't have to answer it, but I'm gonna ask it. Who's our starting shortstop?
You know what? Here's what I tell people. If you had no idea what anyone had done prior to this season and had no access to a media guide or anything like that, and just walked into the ballpark and watched enough spring training games to just judge them on what you've seen this spring, you'd probably say it should either be Angel Martinez or Daniel Schneemann. One of those two. You really would.
Yeah, Martinez has looked really good.
You can't do that because sometimes spring training fools you. You don't want to discount someone who plays well in the spring because that's not fair. But I think there is value and importance in track record and where they are in their careers and what they've done, at least experience-wise in the major leagues. And I think that's why, it's probably going to come down to either Brian Rocchio or Gabriel Arias in the end. And you said you listened to Mike Chernoff's visit with us during the game today. He brought up a great point on the air. He just said, he goes, they're pressing. There's no question about it. They're pressing and it shows. And it's okay. Like, this is the first time in their careers where they're close enough where there's a job out there to be had. It's their job to take. And everyone reacts differently to that. And they're struggling with it. There's no question about it.
Yeah, but then you got to wonder too. So let's just say, for example, since Arias had the most time there last season and they pick him to start off the season, what kind of leash do you give him? Because you don't want to keep bouncing back and forth between guys. I think if you pick Arias, Tyler Freeman seems to have cemented himself in a nice platoon role. He's been playing really well in center field. So if you pick Arias, Rocchio goes to AAA. Well, is it a factor of both? If Rocchio's playing really well in AAA, which he seems to always have done, then do you call him up if Arias is struggling? And then then what? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we've been talking about this for several years now. We really still don't have any answers.
No, that's a good point. I mean, look at, I don't know how long the leash is, how much time you give whoever has that job at the start. But the flip side to it is, and we see it every year, there's always someone who starts in the minor leagues and seems to come up shortly after May 1st and becomes a mainstay. So if Martinez and Schneemann are at AAA Columbus playing well, get off to good starts, and they're one of those guys, that's okay. I don't know what the leash is, but as long as they're playing well down there, I think there's a feeling that you can go get them. And give Arias or Rocchio a fair chance to try and settle in at the major league level. But it's interesting because Arias had such a great opportunity the last 2 months of last season, and he just couldn't quite grab it.
There
and
was
he's
flashes there, some flashes of great power, and that arm, he's
that's
got a cannon. But
yes.
that lefty split was something to be desired.
Yeah, so that's the tough part because you see it every once in a while, and Rocchio's interesting too. Like there's some flashes there. So, um, the hardest thing in this game is patience. Knowing how much patience to have with certain players and where they're at. But I know Tito, you always used to say you never want to not be patient and then watch somebody play really well for someone else because you just didn't give them a fair shake.
Well,
But I know it's different for everybody.
yeah.
So I don't know what the
And
leash is for these
do you
guys.
think there's some worry about that with like what happened with Nolan Jones and Will Benson just this past season?
I think every case is different. Um, but maybe. But I know every case is different. Um, I think they moved both of those guys eh, not because they came up here and failed. I think there were different circumstances to move the two players that you had mentioned. It wasn't because they got a good enough look at them and then said, "Hey, let's move." This is different. I mean, they've gotten a pretty good look at Arias, and they may get more of a look at him at the start of this season. So they should have a pretty good idea on him by the time they make a final decision.
Okay, interesting insight. Thank you.
Well, you talked about Tito. Obviously, Tito's not here anymore. Rosie, what has been your impression with new manager Stephen Vogt?
It's good. He's been fun to be around, and um, he's run a good camp. I mean, I don't know how different any spring training camp is out here. I'm sure they're all different a little bit. They all kind of try and get to the same spot at the end of spring training, but it's been fun, and there's some similarities there, and then he's put his stamp on some things. Um, very much detail oriented, and his staff is the same way. I mean, it's a pretty well oiled machine. And when I say that, like the mornings before the games, the work they're doing, they've tried to make it fun. Some games in there, but to get all their work done, and by work I mean, the defensive drills that everybody does, the pitchers fielding practice, the base running drills, outfield drills, all that stuff that they do in the mornings that every team does every year in spring training. It's running really well here, and so I think that's important. Just talking to players, he's made a real good effort to try and get to know them, which is a key for him because he's new. I think the players had a certain comfort level with Tito because he had been here a while, and Stephen Vogt has really worked hard to build that quickly, and that's hard to do. But he's really making a great effort to try and do that, and I think it's not gone unnoticed by the players, and they appreciate it.
And I've listened to a few interviews with him, and he's mentioned a couple of things that he felt like he was going to do different. One of them being he said that he felt like he wanted the hitters to be more aggressive, especially in better counts. He wanted them swinging a little bit more. And then another thing he had mentioned was he felt like he was going to utilize lineup spacing a little bit different than Tito did. I mean, in a lot of cases, especially with, Ahmed Rosario, you could basically put him into the two hole for the entire time he was here. And Steven had mentioned how he was going to change based on matchups and the starting pitcher and tendencies and things like that. Is there anything else that you've picked up on that you might think might be different from that we might notice with Stephen Vogt compared to Tito?
I think it's so hard to tell um, in spring training because they run the games differently. They're kind of scripted before it even starts. So, and you're not going to do certain strategy things in spring. You're just not. You're getting players their at bats. You're getting pitchers their innings. So it's so different, and we won't know until the season begins. And the hitting part of it, that actually, that was Chris Valleca and the hitting team, and obviously Stephen was a part of that once he was hired, but they started that right after the season, um, talking to different hitters about their off-season plans and how they wanted them to approach things to maybe get a little bit more power. So that was the hitting department, and obviously Stephen's on board with that since taking over as manager. But in terms of even the lineup things you were talking about, it's hard to know until the season begins, because spring training is so different. And, you could see Hosey batting leadoff if he needs to next week because he needs the at bats. You know what I mean? So, it's so we won't know till the season begins, I guess is the best way to put
I love it. I love the answer. Well, I know you and Tom were talking during the broadcast today about Davison De Los Santos and what do you think about him? Do you think what's the chances he does make the opening day roster?
I mean, I think they wanted so bad to keep him. Absolutely. I don't know if they can. It's hard. But that's the nature of the Rule 5 drafted player. And just I'm guessing most of your fans know, but he was a Rule 5 selection from Arizona. So the Guardians have to keep him on the major league roster all season, or they have to offer him back. If they don't think he can stay on the roster, they can't just send him to the minor leagues. They have to offer him back to the Diamondbacks, and the Diamondbacks can take him back for half the original price that it cost to get him. So that's tough because he's 20 and he's never played above AA. But earlier this week, he had a huge day against the Dodgers and swung the bat ridiculous, hit a home run and had a couple of base hits in addition to that. And there you saw the player that I think they were hoping that they'll have. But if you keep him, is most likely an infrequently used bench player. So is that hurting his development that he'd probably have a AAA season this year? If he wasn't Rule 5. He'd be
And
AAA
if he stays, that means maybe somebody like Estevan Florial doesn't make the team, or Kyle Manzardo starts in AAA. We talked about kind of the logjam that we have at shortstop, but there's also this cluster of other young players that are in several different spots, whether it's first base and DH and right field and center field, that, keeping one means somebody else goes. Florial doesn't have any options left. Chase DeLauder has all of his options left. Kyle Manzardo has options left. He's not even on the 40 man. So, obviously everybody's situation's not the same, but, if this team is going to go the young route, I think people are going to be a little more inclined to want to see Kyle Manzardo sooner, or the way Chase DeLauder's playing. It's going to be tough for them to, I think, send him down. And I know Mike Chernoff said, there's some things that we want to see him do in AAA today. And he's kind of in the same situation you mentioned with De Los Santos. He only played a few games in AA last year.
What's interesting is if the Guardians are coming off a 100-loss season and it kind of looked like they were heading down that road and we're in a total rebuild, they'd keep De Los Santos in a heartbeat. They would just bite the bullet and do it. But they still feel they're a playoff team. That last year was just, one of those years where injuries caught up with them. You look at their starting rotation, it's really, really good. There's a lot to like, and that makes it harder to try and carry him. And maybe they would bring up a Chase DeLauder sooner. I don't know. But it's different when you feel that you can get a postseason berth and maybe win a division, as opposed to if you're in a rebuild mode and know that there's going to be a lot of losses and growing pains, then you just add De Los Santos to that growing pain mix and be done with it. But
right.
I don't know that they can do that with the expectations that they have. And you have a Cy Young candidate pitcher who's returning to form here in Shane Bieber, Jose Ramirez at third base, two of the best players of their position in the game, who want to go to the postseason. It would be hard for them to carry him, but who knows? Maybe they just do it and try.
So, Jim, you made a comment and said that they feel like they're a playoff team. And last year when we had you on, I mean, we were really excited coming off that playoff season, and we were excited about some of the additions they made with Josh Bell, and that didn't really work out, and they ended up trading him. But I'd say from the outside looking in, at least from my perspective, I'm a little disappointed that they didn't do more this offseason. Let's take, for example, Adam Duvall just signed with the Braves for only $3 million. He hit more home runs than our entire outfield last year. So is it just that they really, really believe on all these young players and they didn't want to add more logjam?
There's some of that, but I also do think the lack of clarity on the TV deal and how much money they would be bringing in on the TV deal had a lot to do with it too. And I think proof of that is your World Series champion Texas Rangers are in a similar boat. They kind of have TV deal issues as well, and they didn't do as much, I think, as for their team that they thought they could have. So it may have been a little bit different had there been more clarity there. But I don't know if I know there was big disappointment. Their two big signs last year did not work out at Mike Zunino and Josh Bell. I'm not sure if that played into it, where they just feel the options in-house are better.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where they're at, and that's what they're going to go with.
Obviously, Rosie, I gotta ask, who's made that lasting impression on you so far this in spring training?
Go with DeLauder. Is that crazy to say that? I mean, obviously there's other guys who had good springs. Naylor and Posey and some of the regulars have been just fine. But in terms of someone who has really stood out, DeLauder for sure. Unexpectedly, just because I didn't know as much about him, Daniel Schneemann has been really good. And Angel Martinez, although we had heard a lot, like he's very well respected within the organization in terms of prospect status. Not the outside rating systems or whatever, but just when you talk to people on the minor league side about him, development people, your GM, people like that, they love the kid. And so to see him do what he's doing, you're like, oh yeah, that's what they were talking about. Like Schneemann's been out of nowhere, and DeLauder, you just didn't have much of a track record on yet. Obviously, they're high on him because he was drafted high, but he's been really, really something because it's against major league pitching for the first time. So that's been fun.
Yeah. In every spring training, every NFL training camp, we always hear about guys that come into camp like best shape of their life, or they made this change and they're looking great. Who's that guy this year at spring training in Arizona? Is it Will Brennan with his changed swing, or is it Tyler Freeman that supposedly put on a couple of pounds of muscle? Who's that guy that's in the best shape of his life and looking to really make that jump this year?
All right, two guys. The ones you mentioned, yes, the interesting because they made changes. But Hunter Gaddis, who there's a chance that they might give him a shot near the back end of some games here to be the Trevor Stephan, because his stuff has been off the charts. And I talked to him earlier this week, and he hasn't necessarily lost weight, but he's redistributed it where he's stronger and more flexible, and he looks awesome. He really does. And so you could probably say he's in the best shape of his life. Here's the other one. And I talked to him this morning, and it took me a long time to approach him about this because he could take it the wrong way. Austin Hedges looks slimmer. And so
I've noticed that.
I was trying to figure out how to, you know what I'm going to say? What, do you think I was fat the last time I was here? So I just said, hey, have you dropped some pounds? And he said, absolutely. From the end of the World Series, when he was with Texas, to coming into camp, he dropped 20 pounds.
I noticed it on the slip and slide video. The man has abs now. That's a little bit different.
Listen, how the iconic picture of you is after they clinched, and he's got the cigar and his shirt's off, and it's just people are giving him a hard time. That's a baseball player right there. That's why baseball players are.
He's rocking that dad bod, and everybody loved it. I mean, it was perfect. It was like Cleveland right there. That was the definition right there.
Well, what got me thinking about it was they have weekly weigh-ins just to make sure that really it's more to make sure they're not dropping weight, that they're eating enough to maintain their weight while they're, you know, doing spring training, because you work out in the morning, you're doing drills and all that, and then you're playing a game, you can lose weight, and that's not good. So they weigh him, and he gets on the scale and gets off, and he's like, heavyweight champion of the world, you know, and I'm looking at him like, wait a minute, he might not be a heavyweight anymore. So I asked him this morning, and he said, yeah, I dropped 20 because I wasn't happy with who I was as a player at 20 pounds heavier. I want to be better. I know they bring me in because of the clubhouse stuff and I'm a great whatever. But he goes, I want to be a good player too. Like, you can't be the other stuff if you're not contributing on the field. And he feels he's in the best shape he's ever been in, and is really looking forward to seeing if he can put up some numbers this year.
So speaking of Austin Hedges, we got a couple of reports, and they were rather vague. One that he was scratched for a collision, and then that all he had was a black eye. Was he teasing Stephen Kwan too much, and Stephen Kwan bopped him or something? Is there a story there that needs to be told?
I feel like we were on the road the day that happened. And,
Oh,
and
okay.
I think I had left camp early. I was a little disappointed because they didn't, like, they said he was scratched because of an incident, and he had that, you know, I saw this, you know, there was a cut above his eye, and I should have asked him, but they never said who the other guy was. So I don't know if it was another guy or if he hit like a, you know, ran into the cage behind the plate or something, or
Right. Was he doing the Happy Gilmore and saying,
yeah.
gotta toughen up and taking baseballs to that or something?
So bad job by me, knowing I'm going to be on your show, not asking the right
It's
questions.
okay. We didn't
I
tell you
left
we were
that.
going to ask you that.
Yeah, it's still out there. Well, I'm curious too. So maybe tomorrow I'll stick around.
I love that. That's fantastic. All right, I got one more question for you, Rosie. What are your thoughts on our starting outfield? Who do you see where, other than we know Stephen Kwan is entrenched in left? So who's in center? Who's in right? Who may be our fourth outfielder?
You know what? I think to start the year, I think Straw is going to be back in center at the start of the season. I think they're going to give him a chance to see if the adjustments he made in the offseason will work. They certainly have shown well here in spring training. It had limited time because he was sick, but when he has played, he has swung the bat way better, just better than he did a year ago. More authority. He hit one to the opposite field today, halfway up the wall and right. I mean, drove it to right, opposite field. So that was encouraging. I think he'll start in center, and I don't know if you'll see a platoon with Brennan and Laureano in right field, but I think those are your other two outfielders to start the year, with Tyler Freeman in that mix as a super utility guy.
Yeah, if you look at Will Brennan and Ramon Laureano, they do seem to make a really nice righty-lefty platoon right field situation. And what seems to be nice too is all those guys can also play center field.
There is some versatility there for sure. So I think that'll be a fluid situation throughout the year. I really do. I don't know that your four outfielders to start the year and where they play and how much they play will look anything like it does in September if this team is in.
And with just a few minutes left here, Rosie, you had mentioned earlier, there's always that guy that comes up in May and kind of takes the team by storm, or, you know, is called up. You think Kyle Manzardo's that guy?
Ooh, I don't know. That's interesting. And I only say that because I'm not sure where he plays. Maybe a little bit at first, swapping out with Naylor. Yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on, you know, all that other stuff we talked about earlier with De Los Santos and Florial, and, you know, are they around? Are they a part of it? And that may hold him up for a little bit. It looks good though in spring training. He has swung the bat well and certainly looks the part. So maybe he is that guy. I hadn't thought of that. It's a good one.
Do you have another candidate maybe then?
I don't.
If you weren't thinking Manzardo?
That's the thing. Like, whenever that happens, like the year Jose broke out. Wouldn't have even thought of it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people forget Jose was playing left field for a while
Yes.
in
This time
2016.
the year he broke out, he was spring training trying to learn how to play left field. It's crazy. So, but yeah, man, Zardo's as good a guess as anybody, I would say.
Well, great. Well,
Is there any pitcher, Rosie, real quick, that has really stuck out to you? I know you said Hunter Gaddis looked really good. Has there been any other pitcher that you were like, wow, he looks really good?
You know, it's and maybe it's not fair to use this guy for that, but Tristan McKenzie, how is he going to do coming off the injury year last year? And he's looked really, really sharp. And I guess maybe it's just because I figure he's always going to be good, but kind of coming off the injury too. Bieber's been tremendous. I mean, he looks like vintage 2020 Shane Bieber. He really does. So
look out. Look
the
out.
The velo's up and all that. But I know you're probably looking for like a younger guy. But
no, I think those are great answers because that was
Yeah.
a big concern coming into the season is, how are all these elbows doing?
Yeah.
And would Shane get that velocity back? Because from what I've read and seen, he's up back to about 94 on his fastball.
That's been good. And everything else is the breaking stuff sharp. And I mean, look, there's a lot of question marks going into the season. If they have any hope of hanging around and being a factor, it's got to be on their starting pitching. And those two guys have to be great. They can't just be working their way back. They have to be great. And they've been before. So we've seen that. And they can be again if they're healthy. So we'll see if they can maintain what's been going on here in spring training. That's the big key.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for today. I know you're very, very busy and you're squeezing us in right after the ball game. So appreciate your time. Appreciate your extra insight that we don't get as fans and listening to interviews, and there's those little extra things that you're able to provide. So really, really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. I don't know if you can hear in the background, or the groundskeepers are doing their thing. If you need any lawn work done, I can send them over right when they're done.
I live in Parma, Ohio, and I have a lot of deer, so I already had my aeration done.
Have you done that already?
The deer hooves
that.
really, really poke a lot of holes in the muddy spring grass.
Very nice.
Jim, we
Thanks,
appreciate
guys.
it as always. We go Guards. We're looking forward to it, and maybe, just maybe, we're making a deep run. Maybe mid-season, we see about you coming back on and keeping us up to date.
Reach out anytime.
Thank you so much.
Love it. Thanks, Jim. Go Guards. Be safe in Arizona. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
Have a good night.